Welcome to Podlygamists, the Sisterwives rewatch podcast.
Sisterwives is a reality show centered on a Mormon polygamist family originating in Lehi, Utah. Over 12 years and 16 seasons, TLC's longest-running reality show tells the story of Cody Brown and his 4 wives, Mary, Janelle, Christine, and Robin, and their journey as spouses and parents living plural marriage in the public eye. As superfans, we have watched the family as they grow and overcome challenges, endure numerous moves, face loss, and celebrate all the moments in between. We love the Brown family, and fresh off some major changes following season 16, we decided to go back to the beginning and embark on the ultimate rewatch so that we could see the early days with fresh eyes and try to draw connections between the Brown family of 2010 and where we are today. I'm Samantha Kaiser.
And I'm Hailey Graff.
And this is Podlygamists, bonus episode, Under the Banner of Heaven, book discussion, part 1.
So before we get into it then, I wanted just to quick really shout out some lovely friends and family and non-friends and family that are fans now of the show that we have gotten the chance to interact with on the social media and stuff. First of all, my lovely friend Katie, who has been listening and following along and texting me her thoughts. I appreciate you so much. Carly, my former roommate Carly, thank you so much for listening. My sister Nikki, and of course hashtag cousin Danny is maybe our most loyal listener. And then our now correspondent on the ground, Dalton G. On the ground. He's not in Utah, he's not a polygamist or a Mormon, but he's a thoughtful responder. And
correspondent on the ground.
Also funny, I'm not going to get into it or explain it, but also kind of cousin Dalton.
Right?
And Alex from Australia. So fun to talk to you recently on the Instagram and for sharing your thoughts. It was what a thrill to have a fan from Australia.
Right?
So yeah, we appreciate you and appreciate everybody who interacts, follows social medias, send us your thoughts. Comment, whatever you want to do to engage. We're so excited about all of it. So we appreciate you.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. This is our first discussion of Under the Banner of Heaven of part 1 of at least 2, depending how long this goes,
right.
Tentatively 2 episodes. And you're going to cover now today the historical side of that.
Yeah, because the thing with this book is that it goes back and forth between the history of Mormonism and then the true crime, and it has to do that because I'm gonna read the little blurb on the front to kind of give context. So everyone who's watching, but for those listening, Under the Banner of Heaven. So it says, on July 24th, 1984, a woman and her infant daughter were murdered by 2 brothers who believed they were ordered to kill by God. The roots of their crime lie deep in the history of an American religion practiced by millions. So that's the premise here. And I'll say, you'd probably do a trigger warning. There won't be much today, I don't think, but light trigger warning today for violence, a little bit of underage abuse.
Cultish, kind of anything that's cultish that you can think of that could be triggering.
Yeah.
Variety of abuses and things. Maybe not for you, but
yeah. So maybe
the book is
take that.
Yeah, we won't get as graphic as the book does because it's not really necessary for our purposes. But the book, if you're thinking about reading it still, it does get real graphic at some points. So just sexually and things like that. So just noted. Violence in general, just noted.
Yeah, just something to be aware of if it would bother you. So, but yeah, we won't get too into that stuff, and especially not today because we're doing the history and stuff today, which is not as traumatizing or anything like that. But, and I wanted to start by prefacing, because I am going to be going into the history, that this is a quote that Krakauer said that I thought was really important, because there are some difficult things that aren't on the up and up historically, factually speaking with some of the history. But he says a quote towards the end of the book. He says, "Illuminating unpleasant historical truths is not the same thing as bigotry." I think that's like important because it's not just like cutting down or being hateful by saying, okay, this really negative thing happened. It doesn't mean that like I'm saying Mormons are terrible or something like that. It's not any hate or anything like that, but there are historically horrible things in every single religion, and Mormonism is no exception. So,
yep, yeah, I think that's definitely a good thing to start off with. Is like the history of anything has unpleasant like facts that are just a part of it, and this is no exception. And we're not condemning. Well, we condemn a lot of the stuff in the book, but as a Christian, I guess I can say there's some unpleasant factual things that have happened in the history of, a much longer history, wars and abuses and creative interpretations and things like that that I don't like sign off on. And I can, I think we can probably safely say that the vast majority of people who are Mormon today don't sign off on a lot of things that have happened, or yeah. So anyways, this isn't to like villainize any like broad group, but there's bad guys in any group, and so that's a part of it.
And there's even maybe who are not bad guys, but some that are doing some questionable things too. That we're all human beings and there are shades of gray. So
yeah. Yep. Different. But, yeah. So anyways, we'll get into it, but just the blanket policy, I guess, on the
just to let it, this isn't a bash Mormons thing. We're not here for that.
We have a whole podcast about right? A specific family of Mormons, so I think we're like,
I think people understand we're not. We love
haters.
We love members of the Mormon community, so I mean we're not hating. So
like knowing bits and pieces, and then being able to like string it all together with all this background. It A makes so much more sense. You're like, oh, I see, okay. And then B, it makes so much less sense too. So like,
really did back and forth.
Yeah. So, anyways,
yeah, but okay. So I mean, Joseph Smith is the founder of Mormonism. So, getting into talking about his history, he was born in 1805 in Vermont, and he was born in a poor family. But one really important thing that comes into play with Mormonism is that the time in which he was born was post-Revolutionary War, and so the United States was a brand new country and still like, getting our legs underneath us, so to speak, as a country. But so people were really experiencing a kind of doubt in their religion and feeling like we were morally lost as a country and not really knowing if our previous religions were good enough. I mean, it was just kind of a lot of questioning, just religious turmoil. And like they said, established churches were viewed by a lot of people as being spiritually bankrupt. So people didn't have a lot of faith in established religion and everything at the time. So that'll come into play. But his early religious leanings were heavily influenced by his mom, whose name was Lucy Smith. So she was really interested in mysticism, and she accepted like a highly personalized God that she would talk to as though that God was like a member of the family. So it was very personal to her. So that most likely had a lot of influence on his later thoughts in religion. So Joseph himself, he didn't have like a ton of formal education. He was doing like a lot of work with the family to help make money and stuff. But he did have a really strong imagination, and he was super charismatic. So that'll come into play later too. But in his youth, the Smith family, they moved to Palmyra, New York. I don't know if I'm saying that quite right. Palmyra.
Well, I assume it's pronounced that way because where I come from in Wisconsin, I think this is the first time I've ever identified my state of origin and residence. But there's a Palmyra, Wisconsin as well, and it's a very strange little town, which is really like, I don't know if they have some kind of, if the founders were connected to Mormonism in some way, and that's Could or couldn't. Again, unsure if it's related, but yeah, there's a Palmyra, Wisconsin as well.
Okay, so we'll go with Palmyra then. If anybody is from the area in New York and wants to correct us, that's cool. But for now, it's going to be Palmyra.
I did work at a gas station in Palmyra, Wisconsin. Side note.
Did you really?
Anyway.
But yes, I mean, they moved to Palmyra, New York, and there he met a neighbor girl named Sally Chase, who taught him how to be a diviner, so to speak, like a crystal gazer, or like scryer type person. So I found this hilarious that she gave him what was called a peeping stone, which basically it was like a small green rock that he used to divine, so to speak, where buried treasure, like artifacts or things of value, were located. So it was funny, like the way they described it in the book is that like he'd put it in like a hat, and I'm picturing like a top hat, but yeah, like, oh, look at you already with that. For anyone listening, Hailey's holding up a hat.
Came with prepared with props because I thought this was hilarious.
Look at you go. That's awesome.
Probably was a hat or some other sort of hat, but this is the hat I have, so
that's great. So basically, you have this hat, as if the viewer can see Hailey's holding up, and you take the peeping stone, put it in the hat, and then put his face in the hat. Hailey's got her face in the hat, and then I guess a vision or something would reveal itself to show him where hidden treasures were. So for anyone who couldn't imagine that, check out our YouTube. You can see Hailey with a lemon,
a greenish lemon, and a hat.
And a hat for the unimaginative listener.
It cracked me up.
That was hilarious, Hailey. Thank you. I love that you have that already. But yeah, so I mean that's what he did. And so by 1825, he had kind of developed a prominent reputation as a diviner, and so he was hired by someone named Josiah Stowell to use the peeping stone to locate a hidden lode of silver that they said had been mined by Spaniards centuries earlier. So sucky thing for Joseph is that he never found the silver mine or any other treasure in his 6 years of scrying. And then he was sued for being a fraud and found guilty of being, quote, a disorderly person and an imposter.
Yeah, he was kind of like a fraudster, seen as a fraudster, like a scam artist a little bit, right?
Yeah, like a charlatan, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
also, yeah, I gotta imagine, like, I don't know how, and this is a time of, like, religious, like, revolution or evolution in a way, maybe. But I gotta imagine, like, those who were subscribed to, like, more traditional Christian religion, this is, like, idolatry and, like, you know, some would say
people weren't loving it.
Not aligned with, like, the traditional Christian faith, I guess, in this. I would assume in this time. Also, just clicked for me that he was a child when he was kind of like this imposter and fraudster. Like he was like
a teenager,
the town like fraud, but he was, you know, a minor.
It's just like basically just this high school student who's going around like saying he can find treasure with using his magic stone. But yeah, I mean, so you know, it wasn't great for him to be found guilty of fraud and whatnot. But during this time, he also was given divine intervention when he was in 1823, when he was 17. He says that he was visited by an angel named Moroni. We're going to say Moroni. I hope it's right.
Moroni?
Yeah. Moroni. Again, apologies to Mr. Jessup.
It just sounds like nonsense the more I try to repeat it. So I'm just kidding.
Yes, I mean, Moroni. I'm going to just say it like that. And if it's wrong, again, so sorry. But so the angel was sent by God to tell him about a sacred text that was inscribed on solid gold plates that had been buried 1,400 years earlier on a hill nearby where he lived. So he like got up the next day and ran and dug up the plates. But then the angel had told him like, you're not ready to receive these plates yet. So then they disappeared. But one of the things he needed to do in order to become ready to receive the plates was to get married. And the angel told him he was to marry a neighbor girl named Emma Hale, who, as luck would have it, he was already crushing on. So maybe the angel was looking out for him there a bit.
Times fate, you know.
Right.
Funny thing.
So I mean that worked out nicely for Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
But in 1827, so then in the year 1827, he'd asked Emma's dad if he could have her hand in marriage, and he was like, no, because you're a charlatan, convicted, so to speak. And so then Emma is her own woman though, and she also was into Joseph, so they ran away together and eloped.
There was a horse-drawn sleigh in that equation, if I recall, which another
Ooh.
his like just the most like cinematic life this person has had. He's like Tom Sawyer or something, like run away with Emma on his horse-drawn sled or sleigh
at like midnight or whatever.
into the night. Yeah, I mean, who knows if that's maybe like editorializing a little bit on his part. Possible, but I like it. I like the creative image.
I loved it. Like, I was like, I understand why this guy was able to form a religion and have followers, because I was entertained as all get out learning about him. Yeah, I mean, so then, you know, they run off and got married and then went to the hill to dig up the plates. So then he set to work translating them from, like, was it Egyptian?
I don't have a note on that.
I said, like, I think it was like pseudo-Egyptian kind of language.
Yeah. For the sake of this, let's say it's pseudo-Egyptian.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm not even gonna go there. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was translating that. He enlisted his neighbor named Martin Harris to help him translate it. And so together they transcribed 116 pages of text. But then Martin's wife was super skeptical about this whole thing. She's like, I don't believe it. This is a hoax and whatever. Mm-hmm. So Martin was like, hey, can I take the pages home to show my wife this is legit? You know, it's not just some scam or whatever. I don't know what happened. I guess only Martin and his wife can answer to that, if she threw them in the fire or what, but the pages disappeared. Mm. So that was a bummer. They had to start over. I mean, it's okay because it all worked out. They did get it transcribed again, and Joseph took all the pages, which would become the Book of Mormon, all these pages that he transcribed, but he took them to the printing press to get them published, and he wanted to publish 5,000 copies of it. The printer told him, hey, it's going to cost you $3,000, which at that time was quite a lot. And he said, great, yeah, look it up and see if, I mean, that's a lot of money, but he said, okay, well, I don't have $3,000, but God, I guess, gave him a revelation that it was God's will for Martin to pay for the printing of the Book of Mormon. And Martin did. And I just want to give a shout out to Martin Harris, because what an unsung hero. Because without him, we wouldn't have the Book of Mormon, likely. It wouldn't have got printed.
Yeah, not then. And also the conversion, I just said in 1800, what was $3,000? An underwhelming $67,000. I thought it would be more.
I thought it would be more too. But I mean, I guess
it's not
you wouldn't just have $67,000 to
No, if Joe Smith was trying to print his book and he needed almost $70,000, it'd be tough to come by unless you came across a Martin Harris. Am I saying that?
Martin Harris.
Good old Martin Harris. Faithful as all get out, that guy.
I mean, basically, I'd say probably like his first follower in that regard, that he believed so much in the word that they had transcribed that that he was willing to fork over a fortune for him to get it printed after losing it. So I just found that hilarious. So I was like, "Yeah, Martin's gotta pay for it," and he did.
Is Martin the same fellow that also like mortgages his property later, his farm?
Yeah.
Oh, Martin.
Oh, Martin. Man, Martin should be talked about more in the Mormon faith, I think.
Maybe he's like a saint or something. Maybe
I hope so.
Maybe he's cited as like a very faithful servant or something.
I hope so, because good golly, I mean, the future of Mormonism could have been very different without Martin Harris. So,
good point.
One thing that should be noted about these plates, though, is that they did disappear after translation. So, take from that what you will. 19 people, though, did attest that they had seen the plates. And so I don't know if, like, the angel took them back or whatever it was, but present day, the plates are not in existence that we know of. But 19 people did say that they saw the plates that he transcribed the Book of Mormon from.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Darn.
Yeah, that would, because I honestly Googled, because I was like, oh my gosh, if we go to Utah, I want to go see these plates.
You haven't gotten that far in the book yet, though, where they're like, actually.
Yeah, I didn't, because I just Googled, and then they were like, yeah, the plates we don't know where they are. We don't, and I was like, oh shit, okay, never mind. I really thought they'd have them in like, like a museum or like the church in Utah. I was expecting it, but just don't get your hopes up. So they're not there. But yeah. So that was kind of the start of Mormonism, and then it started to spread, which is kind of insane how quickly it spread. But it's awesome. Like I think it's a testament to Joseph's personality. But basically, so when he printed these 5,000 copies of the Book of Mormon, was passing them out, and preaching the word from the Book of Mormon. People who were non-followers, though, were pretty mad about historical inaccuracies in the book, inconsistencies and stuff. I mean, one historical inaccuracy that has been debunked. So, I mean, scientifically speaking, we can say this is not true. But it did say that ancient Jews populated America pre-Columbus, and that Native Americans here are descendants from the ancient Hebrews. Modern DNA analysis has refuted that. So that is what it is. But again, like, I did really appreciate that Krakauer was saying, like, it's much easier to refute a more modern text in religion than it is to refute like the Bible and the Quran that were written centuries ago. I mean,
yeah,
he said all religious belief is a function of non-rational faith. Like, anyone who subscribes to a religion is believing in things that we can't prove. So while there are some things in Mormonism that maybe are a little wild, there's some maybe out there to some people, that is true of any religion. So
yeah. Just a little check yourself moment too. Like, we giggle and laugh about some of the stuff, but also, like, I wasn't raised in Mormonism where this is just like part of what now this is like a new story to us.
Yeah.
So it's like, interesting. But also, like, Noah's Ark. I mean, there's a lot of things that if you just sat down with someone new and explained something, they'd be like, okay.
Sure.
The bush talked, the burning bush, it spoke, okay. Like,
right. I mean, like the snake tempting Eve, the snake talked to Eve. Sure.
Well, like, that's not even the craziest part of that story. Like, there's two people and she was made, Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, there are some wild things in any religion. Yeah. So I think the overall message of the religion is much more important in any religion than like a detail of a certain parable or story in it. So whatever. But that's what it says, and that obviously is historically inaccurate. But again, there are probably dozens of things in the Bible and the Quran that are also historically inaccurate, but just harder to prove that they are. So that being said, he formally established the church in 1830, and it had only 50 members, which were probably like his family and friends. But it grew within a year. It grew to over 1,000 people, which is insane. That's an insane amount of growth. One thing I think like that Krakauer says that like really appealed to a lot of people was that he said anyone can speak like directly to God the way he like God speaks to him and he speaks to God, and like so you that's different than like other religions, because I'm assuming like Catholicism it's not a thing, right? Like
I'm not an expert on Catholicism. I'm not Catholic. And I've actually I've only been to a handful of like Catholic funerals. Like I don't even have that much like indirect experience. My brand of Christianity, you would say you have a personal relationship with God. So it's funny that that's like so appealing, but that I think given the time, literacy, all that stuff, like you had to rely on other people to interpret the Bible.
Literacy, that's a really good point.
Kind of like counsel you and that kind of stuff. Like you weren't like the average person wasn't trusted to be like in charge of their own faith necessarily without like a lot of guidance. I think I'm Pastor Jake. If you're listening, I'm so sorry. I know I'm not.
Weigh in for next time, Pastor Jake. If we're getting it wrong,
Michelle too. Both of you. I get it. Yeah. I'm an expert. I'm just kind of spitballing here, but that might have been unique at the time, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
You're just not you're trusting someone else to like interpret and like represent like your relationship with God on earth, as opposed to just like prayer. But also another thing that just occurred to me that is different in this theory, where I think a big part of the appeal of Mormonism and like the difference between like a personal relationship with God and revelations that you're receiving, that individuals are receiving. That's not something that I don't necessarily like agree that you're receiving your own revelations and like adding to scripture and adding to like religious, we'll call it law.
And that's so important with the true crime that takes place.
Exactly. Yeah. And like, a lot we could get into there. But
well, I mean, like that's the thing, like in saying, not only is it we're all speaking directly to God, but like you said, it's that we are all receiving personal revelations from God too. But then that did prove problematic for Joseph, because I mean, then people were like, well, what do we really need you for then? If we could just have those revelations ourselves.
Yeah.
So he did eventually kind of retract that statement and say that he had a revelation then that only he could receive revelations, which I, again, take that as you will, but I had to wonder though, I'm assuming he wanted his religion to continue even after his death and everything. What happens then? Like who takes the mantle, I guess, if that's the case? I don't know if that's maybe not something you thought about or just didn't discuss. I don't know.
Given what we learned about Joseph Smith and his like development of this religion, I'll say that's just the word that's coming to mind. I guess there's probably a better word. He didn't like have a ton of forethought. Like it was a lot. There's a lot of like on the fly decision making and revelationing that I wouldn't be shocked if that hadn't like, because he didn't die old. He wasn't an old man. So I wonder if he just hadn't gotten that far yet.
Right.
And playing devil's advocate, if he is a fraud, if he is, doesn't really matter to him what happens when he dies to the religion.
Yeah, because he's not there to worry about it.
Because he's not running his empire anymore. He's like, he's on to the whatever he believes the next thing is in life. And like, if he is potential, again, I'm saying if you are the person who looks at someone like this as a narcissist or maybe a little creative and unwell in some ways, like if you could again, to rewind a little bit and just to like have some context, like without faith in Christianity, if we put it that way, Jesus is either a crazy person or he's Jesus. Like there's two ways to put it. He's either a crazy person who walked around and claimed to know God and claimed to see God and blah blah blah, or he was a crazy person like preaching on the street who gathered a following.
Yep.
So I'm looking at it as a person who is a Christian, how you would look at Jesus if you don't believe in, if you don't have a faith, I guess. So anyways, if we're applying that framework to Joseph Smith as so as not to offend anybody, because like, again, I get it. I get that religion requires faith of some kind. If he is not of the mouthpiece of God or whatever he says he is, it doesn't matter what happens when he dies, because he doesn't get to revel in the experience of being a leader of these people anymore.
Right.
He doesn't. His time on earth is over, and he was a productive and made a real, he lived a life. Like, you can't argue that. So like, call it a success if that's, so anyways, that was a tangent a little bit, but like,
no, I think that was an important tangent to have, though. It is harder with him having this new religion, really. I mean, as far as religions go, forming in the 1800s is very new.
Yep.
So it's difficult, like, and it's difficult being that we weren't raised in Mormonism to I'm trying to like put myself in both sides, but it is difficult.
Well, I just the reason I made such a big point of that too is just, I'm not trying to say like clearly he's a narcissist. It's like, no, but if he is, who cares? He didn't need to make a plan for after he died. He's not. Then I'm curious, I guess, what if you thought he was.
Then it could have just been his youth of not having it, or that he didn't discuss it yet because it didn't seem relevant.
Yeah, because he didn't die.
You know, like he barely got started before he did. We'll get to it where his passing, but I mean, he maybe just didn't get to it yet. But if we're taking that tact, but yeah. So who knows? Yeah, I mean, so basically, if we pick up with more history, Mormonism continued to grow. So did opposition to it. Naturally, I think that's kind of the case of any new sort of movement, is going to face some opposition. So it started, in Palmyra, New York, but they eventually made their way to Jackson County, Missouri. And they settled in a small town called Independence there, which really pissed off the residents, which I get, because it was this group of people with a new religion coming in, and they basically all started voting in blocks. Like they kind of took over the town's political structure. So that led to a lot of tension, and I understand that. Where it got into violence is where it's not acceptable, obviously. But there was Haun's Mill massacre, and that was a really brutal attack on Mormons. And they, in the book, they describe it, and it's pretty. Some of it was pretty hard to read. It was very, very brutal. So naturally,
and like merciless. Like, not, it wasn't the men who are in power. It was like anybody and anyone who. Yeah. So it was pretty. Yeah, hard to read.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you can disagree on what you believe in. I mean, obviously, religious wars have been historically always a thing. But my goodness, that was very, very sad, that they couldn't have done anything else or acted in any different way. But basically, the Mormons from there kind of shifted their attitude to feeling like they were just really being persecuted, which, I mean, they were.
Yeah.
And Joseph Smith eventually declared, he said, "If people will let us alone, we will preach the gospel in peace. But if they come on us to molest us, we will establish our religion by the sword." And that's a really heavy statement, and it's very inflammatory. However, and I struggle with it because it's like, I don't believe personally that any god or higher being out there is in any way advocating for us to enact violence against each other, as a creation from the higher being. I don't think that's the case. but Joseph is the human, no matter if he was speaking to God or not, or speaking to the angels, anything like that. He is a human, and I do understand that very human reaction of feeling like they have to fight then. I don't condone it, but I do understand it.
Yeah. On a lighter, just that vision, just that visual of this like statement and this, did it remind you at all of when they're trying to teach Dwight how to lead a good speech? You're really convicted and really like, and we will fist pound and this and that, like that.
Bang on the podium.
Yeah, it's almost like a textbook, like leadership, charisma, unite us kind of like statement, and like just knowing that like side of like public speaking and that kind of thing, like well played, Joe Smith. You know what I mean? If you look at it,
Right.
like someone who's trying to lead people, like that'll band you together if you all take that stance. So, anyways, just kind of like a, if we're pointing at all like the things like how did this happen? How did this, like, we're gonna in air quotes for the listener, crazy startup religion happen? Why do cults not make this kind of, again, not equating with the cult per se, but why do other cults get started? I don't mean to say other cults. Why does a person who tries to start a religion not find the success? And what happened here? He was a leader and he knew how to band people together and lead them, and the persecution just strengthened them. And their unit in their, that piece of like what unified them. And
so, I mean, it makes a ton of sense. You know, it's not like just people being blindly following, or I mean, like, it makes sense of why this would appeal and why you would get stronger over time. Yeah, I mean, so obviously things weren't going well in Missouri. So they ended up moving to, and I'm probably going to say this wrong. I never know how to say this town. Is it Nauvoo, Illinois?
Nauvoo.
Nauvoo.
I had the ebook, so I have a little bit more of like a
pronunciation.
Yeah, I have a little bit more clarity on that, I think, with some of these like different names and words and things.
Yeah. So so Nauvoo.
Yep.
Okay. So Nauvoo, Illinois. So they moved there, and that, I mean, that's a huge place in Mormonism. Joseph Smith established himself like the mayor, and then he also said he was the king, priest, and ruler over Israel on earth, which Israel on earth was Nauvoo to them. Also, I found it funny, but it does make sense, that during this time he did run for president.
It was like a side plot that was like, well, excuse me?
Yeah, just sort of like a side note. Oh yeah, he also was running for president
of the United States of America. Just in case that was clear. We're not talking about
the
club. We're talking
the big deal president. Yeah. So he was he ran for president, with the goal in mind to make things better for his people and end their persecution, which I get that. And I guess he kind of just thought like the best way to do that was to start from the top. I get it. Yeah. I guess that makes sense.
It'd be effective. I mean,
if he had won, it would have been probably very effective and transformative for the nation, but clearly he didn't. But, had that goal in mind for a little while there. But basically, it's in Nauvoo then that he makes the revelation that's going to change Mormonism completely and split them off from the LDS and the Fundamentalists. So this is the real important part that he said.
The big one.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the big revelation that he said polygamy is a crucial key to gaining entry into the kingdom of heaven. So,
cue the shock in the crowd. Yes.
What is Mr. Jessup said about this on Facebook? I wanted to ask you because I am in the dark of how polygamy helps you to become better suited for heaven or whatever it is. And it wasn't really explained in the book that I noticed, at least. I would love some insight of why exactly, and this will help understand with Sisterwives too, of why they believe so strongly in polygamy and for their faith.
It is loose. it is a loose sort of like, I mean, maybe in the faith it's very clear how with the equate like the math that like this is to like, you know, gain entry to heaven, or it's actually their belief. I don't know. I don't actually remember if Krakauer gets into this, but the way they believe in heaven is different. It's not like heaven. They have a universe. They have planets. Like they rule their own universe. They become a god. Another big selling point is that they become a god of their own universe, basically.
Yeah.
It has to do. So Moroni's, when I read his comment, it was something to do with like the wives determine whether or not the husband in the equation gets their universe or gets their planet. And they do that by washing his feet or something. Like that's how they like agree, like that's how they like sign off on that like decision essentially. The theory is that it basically makes you like an unselfish and pure loving person.
I can see where it would be that way for the wives. I don't know where I can see that being that way for the husbands.
I mean, if he's doing it perfectly and loving every wife 100%, like it's like a test for them to be the most love. Again, the logic is tough, and I doubt that even like 1% of these like men who are in these equations are doing it really well. Because you're set up.
I mean, we've seen that with Cody that it's not perfect, you know.
I mean, you're kind of set up to if you're trying to be if you're being a good guy in that equation, not being creepy and whatever, and you know we get there's some of that in the book, but then I guess you're being like loving like Jesus loves everyone equally and fully. Like you're practicing that as a man in that equation if you're doing it with the best intentions and not fucked up intentions. So how do we discern that? Great question. That's a lot of this whole thing is how do we discern? So yeah, TBD on like the details of that. I think there's more information.
I think in eventual seasons, I was looking it over today, like with Sisterwives, that they do have a few episodes and stuff that are like people writing in questions and stuff that they answer. So I'm assuming, I can't obviously remember what they talked about, but I'm assuming that probably is asked. So we might get some clarity on that down the road.
So Moroni Lopez Joseph also has a podcast he did called The Year of Plural Marriage. Because he actually he had plural wives and now has just one, I believe, as of the.
Oh my goodness, what?
So that might be some good research we could do, and I bet.
Oh, I would love to listen to it. Oh my goodness.
Explain some of the the philosophy and that kind of stuff.
I might listen to that this weekend then. That's interesting.
Yeah. So more research to be done. It just doesn't seem like there's no like mission statement that I've seen that makes it obvious, like, you know.
Yeah, I mean that's what I was struggling with too, because I was like, they keep saying that it is a way to get into heaven, it's a crucial key of getting it, but I just haven't seen the explanation of what exactly. Yeah, because I wrote that in the book too. I wrote in like all caps. I was like, how? I would love to know how.
Please. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's
so.
Yeah. We'll see.
I mean, so obviously, with Joseph Smith, people weren't exactly on board from the get go. Least of all, his wife. Shocker. But he persisted. He said it struck him as impossible that God might possibly frown on such a thing when it felt so good and was so wholly consuming. Which, that's a slippery slope, I think.
That's a good way. That's a great way of saying that. You could think of a lot of, we'll say, just a blanket addictions.
I mean, cocaine feels great, right? But
and it's wholly.
We all do that every day.
Yeah, I mean,
no, I don't do cocaine for the listener. I don't. But I'm just saying.
I mean, I think a drug user would explain something similar to their experience of trying to get clean or something along those lines. So yeah, that's a tough like line of logic to draw to justify something like that. Yeah.
But yeah, obviously, like Emma Smith didn't get it either. Joseph even made a special revelation commanding Emma specifically to be okay with polygamy, or quote, "She shall be destroyed, saith the Lord."
Saith. Gosh, Joe's, how lucky is he to have specific names even given to him in these revelations? Like, couldn't be more clear. Couldn't be more explicitly clear. Emma, how can you deny that? How do you fight that argument?
Well, she did. She didn't. She still was like, nope, not good with it. And so he was just kind of like, well, I'm gonna keep doing it anyways, and he did.
Yeah.
Between 1840 and 1844, God instructed Joseph to take around 40 wives. And here's where it gets problematic, though. Besides just for poor Emma, many of his wives were underage, and he did tell them that the salvation of their family depended on them marrying him.
Troubling.
It's not great, Joe.
It's not a point in the column of good versus questionable in this whole thing.
Yeah, that's a negative there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when you tell we'll call him a child, a tween, a teen, and a minor, but the salvation of them and their whole family is dependent on them marrying you, and this is a faith that you're probably a part of. Tough to argue with when you're a child.
And worried about your family, and
you believe in this person, most likely.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's tough.
So I mean, I can't condone that. That one stings. That one's points against you. Sorry, it just is.
Safe to say, yeah.
Yeah. So that again, I mean, that's historically they have written, like I think you did say, like, I think it is that Lucy Smith that was like 14 when he said he wanted to marry her and that she needed to agree, and she initially said no, but then eventually did.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a bummer. That's a really really tough line there for Joseph to take, but he did. So which ultimately, I mean, kind of led to his death. Really, tensions were continuing between Mormons and non-Mormons, and I mean, we can get into the whole thing, but basically, he was arrested, put in prison with his brother, Hiram, and they were both killed by people who were against what he was preaching and what he was believing, and honestly, a large part in opposition to Mormonism, or not Mormonism, excuse me, to polygamy. Mm-hmm. Mormonism, yes, but very specifically polygamy, because
at this time there was still just LDS. It's not like those who were polygamists were considered fundamentalists. It was like we're all still one party in this up to this point.
Yeah. So
yeah.
I mean, so Joseph was killed as a result of it. Contenders then, to take over him as head of the church, because people didn't want to just end the church because Joseph had died. They still all believed in what he had preached. But basically the contenders fell into two camps of either being pro or anti-polygamy. So ultimately Brigham Young took over, and everyone, I think most people have kind of heard of Brigham Young and Brigham Young University and stuff in Utah. His name is pretty out there and mm-hmm. popular. Even non-Mormons have heard of him. But yeah, he took over, and in contrast, I wrote this. So in contrast to Joseph being like really charismatic and like emotional and a dreamer and stuff, he was really like steady and dependable and pragmatic. So I was like, oh, he was a Janelle.
They also make a big point about their physical differences in the book too. Like Joseph was athletic and handsome and charming, and William was not. Basically,
I was like,
I call him diminutive at one point. I was like,
okay. So all right. So I mean, Brigham maybe wasn't a looker, or
yeah,
whatever. But he was, however, a fan of polygamy, and he had many wives. He also only had one single revelation.
very practical.
I mean, straight to the point. You only needed one. So, but his revelation was for the Mormons to migrate to Utah. So that's obviously very important to modern day Mormonism, is that they're largely centered around in Utah and in the West in America. But then they were still persecuted in Utah, and that led to violence in anger from Mormons and non-Mormons in the area. Mormons were killed in mass, but they also did their fair share of killing. They had kind of they called it like blood atonement, which is basically just killing in the name of God, killing in the name of their religion, which is problematic any way you slice it. But again, they're not alone in religious.
Yeah, there's a lot of violence throughout this kind of period after going to Utah.
Utah, even at the time they migrated out there, it wasn't officially part of the U.S. yet. But the U.S. government was pretty aware of the Mormons. The Mormons were asserting that it was a religious freedom, but the government disagreed, and they were starting to pass legislation to prosecute those who were engaging in polygamy. I mean, it ended up though that by the late 1880s, over 1,000 polygamists have been thrown in jail, which again then added to their sense of religious persecution even more. Wilfred Woodruff was the church president in 1890, and he declared a revelation from God that they end polygamy. So that basically kind of officially split the church into two, of being the Latter-day Saints and then the Fundamentalist Mormons. So I mean, he wrote like this manifesto declaring polygamy not be a thing anymore. And it didn't end polygamy, but it drove it underground, which is significant, where it'll come into the true crime story for sure. That it created a need for secrecy, and that led to things like more violence and assault and like child brides and abuse, and that's where it gets pretty problematic from there.
When you make something illegal, you make it more dangerous, right? You make it like secrecy. You make it becomes shady. Their crime becomes a component. But does making it legal serve to protect anybody in these? I mean, it's so tricky, because we know the Browns. We know that they fought persecution for their lifestyle, and they are all consenting adults.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't make it illegal, does it also allow people to continue to be victimized in situations where it isn't? You could say it was consenting, but like, was there a power structure that forced things to happen, decisions to be made? There's some of that happening in the book. There's some testimonies from like modern day, or like more modern, the 21st century kind of situations happening within these communities of fundamentalists. Like, it's tricky, because I don't want to take the Browns right. I mean, I don't think anyone needs to make what the Browns doing. We don't need to make what they are doing illegal per se. But like, we need to protect people.
But there's a fine line though that could get crossed.
A fine, like, kind of blurry line too in some cases. If their faith, if anyone's hand feels forced by their faith, or what their leadership and their faith is telling them to do. Or, in some cases, the government in their town in rural Utah, where like it's run by people who have fundamentalist Mormon faith, and it's sticky, to say the least, in like modern legislation.
It's a hard one to say.
Say than I thought it would be. So yeah, they did a great job. You really summed up a lot of information well, and also kind of leads into like there's more, and there is more like historical context in the book, more modern stuff in the book, but like if we're looking at the history and how it pertains to the crime and just understanding how this faith started, that was awesome. You did a great job.
So we put out, discussion questions on Instagram. If anybody does want to write in or send us what they think, we'll get next week. I mean, we'll get more into why all of this matters, as far as the crime goes, that you'll be covering. So
I'm excited. So I guess we'll get together again in a few short days to talk about the crime side of Under the Banner of Heaven. It's going to be interesting. I think this context is real important for like even getting your head around what happens in that story, and the motivations involved and the mindset of the people. Not even really just the criminals involved, but the victims and their family. Like, it's a complicated story, so I'm excited to do that some more. And yeah, thanks for joining us.